Hi, I'm coming to you today to discuss Henry Louis Gates Jr. Jr. is the Signifying Monkey. I'm really exhausted. I'm really tired. I've been working all day, so please excuse me. Um, I hope everyone is staying safe, washing your hands, and doing the most important thing, which is not going out. And then hopefully we'll be done with this. I'm hoping and praying. All right. The Signifying Monkey. I started this with my handout with a quote from one of my favorite rappers, um, Eric B. and Rakim. He starts off with, "I ain't no joke. I used to let the mic smoke. Now slam it to the ground and make sure it's broke." That particular line to me is when I hear the term signifying. That is an ultimate form of signifying. In fact, that whole song, "I Ain't No Joke," if you like old school rap and you listen to it, then you already know what I'm saying. But if you listen to it, the whole entire thing is basically about him being the best rapper, best lyricist, better than all the other rappers, and there's really nothing that they can actually do about it. So he is signifying. Right? I must admit that when reading this particular text was difficult. I'd read it previously before for another class, but when looking at it as far as its rhetorical contributions, it was kind of difficult. So I had to go and look at Dr. L. Wanger's presentation on caesur. And I looked at that like twice before I could actually get a grasp of how I wanted to make the connections to the Signifying Monkey. I am responsible for book or chapter 3, book 3. Karen is doing 1 and 2, so hopefully you'll watch her video before you watch mine. But with book 3, it's basically him trying to narrow down and pin down an exact definition of what signifying actually is, right? Henry Louis Gates Jr. completed his undergraduate at Yale University. He went on to Cambridge. He wrote The Signifying Monkey. I put 1950, but that could be wrong. If it's incorrect, I'll go back and change it in the handout before I post it to the class. But he wrote The Signifying Monkey in order to examine the rhetorical features and patterns that are situated within the Black dialect, or how some refer to it now as African American Vernacular English. So he writes The Signifying Monkey in order to examine the contributions to rhetorical theory made from African Americans. I like the way that he opens up chapter 3, and he says, "Signifying is so fundamentally black that it is such a familiar rhetorical practice that one encounters the great resistance of inertia when writing about it." I kind of get that feeling too. Like when talking about it, I feel like there's so much I want to say, and I'm gonna forget some parts because I want to say so many different things. But I'm trying to keep the video very short. This is the second one I've done. The first one was 30 minutes. I was like, who wants to listen to me for 30 minutes? So I redid it. But I'm gonna try to go through it pretty quickly so that I can get through it. The first few definitions, I'm not gonna go through and read each one, but the first few definitions, I think, refer back to the old argument of rhetoric that we looked at with the Greek tradition, which is rhetoric techne, or is it hexis? Or, is it a habit, or is it just a knack, or is it an actual art form? And I think these definitions, I'm going to apply that whole thing to signifying, because signifying is a sort of rhetoric, right? And so is signifying a techne or hexis? Just a knack, or just something that people do? With these first definitions, I kind of equated the accumulating of these definitions to that particular fundamental argument of rhetoric, the Greek argument of rhetoric. Um, because I think that Gates is looking for an exact definition or an exact way to define or to explain what signifying is, but it's the term is so ambiguous, or the definitions are so ambiguous, right? You can't really pin one true definition down. So the first few definitions that I give, in my view, some of them, a few of them, explain signifying as hexes, as just like a nag. It's just like they're just telling jokes about each other's moms, but there's really nothing below that, or there's really no depth to it. And then the second part of the definitions I give, I think, refer to signifying as technique, as an actual art that does have rhetorical structure and features and patterns and things that you can look to, whereas the yo mama jokes are just a particular type of trope of signifying, which Gates says that signifying is the trope of all tropes. But if you limit the definition in that way, then and that is what a lot of linguists and people who look at African American dialect and the act of signifying, that is what they do. They sort of limit it to just this boastful behavior where you insult each other's relatives and you use explicit language and you have to be really nasty or insulting to each other. And while that is what playing the dozens is, playing the dozens is not does not encompass everything that signifying is. It is a particular part or skill within signifying, but it is not the definition of that thing. And so that's the way I arranged the first set of definitions here. What I noticed in these definitions is that a lot of them mention rhetorical indirection or repetition or difference. And so that is one big part of what signifying is. It does utilize those things, those same sort of rhetorical practices and techniques that you would see in standard English. But I think what separates signifying is that the rhetorical indirection and repetition is more focused on meaning instead of the usage of certain words or certain techniques. The meaning is the thing that is replicated or repeated or doubled, right? And so the first few definitions, I think, go through and they give this sort of narrow view. Mesereau implicitly defines it as a homonymic pun, which it is. It is a play on words, but it's so much more than just a play on words. The more substantive definitions that Gates finds is when he gets to H. Rap Brown and Abrams and then Claudia Mitchell Kernan. H. Rap Brown is really like a really fascinating guy. And if you're into this or you just want to know more about what signifying is, I would look at H. Rap Brown because everything that he's written, he's the rapper's rapper, which is why his name is Rap. Again, is repetitive or redundant, right? When I read that particular part, it put me in the mind of the sophist. Because again, to H. Rap Brown, to signify means to use all available means of persuasion in order to convince your audience or the person that you are in this verbal altercation with or verbal sparring with that you are the best. The overall objective is to win. It's not to reveal some underlying truth, because again, signifying reinforces the concept that there's no way to get to the real truth, right? There's no way to get to the real concept of what things actually mean. And so H. Rap Brown puts me in the mind of the sophist. Well, then it's just to win. You can win by trickery. You can win by deceit. You can win because you are a master of words. And so um, that particular thing, in order to win, you have to utilize certain skills. And so these definitions are what make it technique. It becomes an art. And this particular art um, does give way to the five conventions of rhetoric, right? There's arrangement. If you're talking about arranging a discourse back and forth where you're trying to verbally outwit another person, there's arrangement. What are you going to say? How are you going to say it? You have to be able to talk on different topics, no matter what the topic is. That's the whole art of freestyling, right? That's why it's called freestyle. You don't write your things down beforehand. You sort of have these places, or topoi, where you have these places that you can go to and you can pretty much rap about anything. So it gives way to arrangement. I'm sorry, invention, and then arrangement. And then style is something that I'm going to talk about a little later. Memory, most rap and most signifying is done through memory. Even with the tale of the signifying monkey, most of it is handed down orally, and it is told by memory, and then you're passing it down from generation to generation to generation. And then the one thing that's the most important is the delivery. Delivery is the thing, because you have to connect with your audience. Whether your audience is the person you're sparring with, are you getting the type of reaction that you're aiming for, or are you missing the mark? And so, being in tune with the audience and delivery of your message is quite important in signifying. The part that I want to focus on is this part by Claudia Mitchell Kernan. Um, and she's saying that it's a conscious rhetorical strategy. And I like how she talked about how adult black people implicitly instruct a mature child in its most profound and subtle uses by an indirect mode of narration only, implicitly related to the form in the monkey tales. Again, it is a tradition that's passed down. You are taught the monkey's tales, or you are taught the rhetorical strategies so that you can then utilize them within your community or within society or within the world that you are about to embark upon. That also, I also made a connection to that to Quintilian, who focused a lot on instruction, the instruction of the teacher to the tutor. And so there's that aspect of that with signifying as well. But for Claudia Kernan, there's two things that I got from that section where Gates discusses her view of signifying. And I got that, yeah, it's a system of education and training in the classical Greek tradition. That word, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's paideia. And she refers back to it, and she also refers to poiesis, to bring something into existence that did not exist before. From those two things, I connected it with style. And I listed two types of style here. You could either refer to the invitational style, or you could use signifying as a protective style. Gates does mention this as well, because he says that signifying was born out of necessity for slaves who were brought into a country where they were subjugated. And so they had to figure out how to maneuver within this society, learn a new language, and then they're meshing the English language with their own African dialect. And so slaves used signifying as sort of a protective measure, but also as an invitational style, right? For the protective measure, they would sing slave songs or spirituals, and people would think that those spirituals were just them singing, but no. In most of them, if you look, most of the songs, they were either given directions, and a lot of the songs were sung to the people who were trying to escape, and they would sing the song and tell them to follow the North Star, or to wade by the water. That means to stay still, don't move yet, and stay close to the water. They would sing those songs as sort of giving directions to the runaway slaves on where to go and how to go and which place to go into. And so they again had this system of language and concepts, and they're taking English words, but they're giving them other meanings and assigning sort of this double meaning to them. Right? That's the same thing that you see modernly with signifying as well. And the examples that I use are for music, because I love music, and because I love old school rap music, right? And so the invitational style, I put a quote from Rakim again, and it says, "Your offbeat DJ, if anything he plays sound familiar, I wait until he say, play him, so I'm gonna have to diss and broke. You could get a smack for this, cause I ain't no joke," right? Within those 5 or 6 lines, there is just so much wordplay and double meaning there that you would have to have been immersed within that community in order to understand everything that he's saying right there, right? There's this particular thing in rap where it's called biting, right? And if you're from the 90s or you grew up listening to 90s music, Ice Cube referred to it as jacking, right? Jacking for beats. You're jacking somebody's rhymes. The same thing back then, it was called biting. You're biting somebody's rhyme. You're stealing something from them. If you have to do that, then you, of course, are a less of a rapper. But also, that could get you in trouble. Like, you could get a smack for this. But he's not literally talking about physically smacking. He's talking about that rhetorical, that lyrical smacking. Like, as it pertains to battling and going rhyme for rhyme, right? The second one is the protective style. You can use signifying as a mode of protection within the African American community, and this is one of the reasons that you would do as Kernan says and pass it down from one generation to the next and to the younger kids, is because not only do they have to operate out in the larger society, but you even have to, there's a difference in signifying from one black community to the next, right? There's some things that I could say that certain African Americans of a particular generation or a particular region or community wouldn't understand, especially when you talk about Houston lingo and all of that. I put the example from Pusha T because I think it is just a great example. Pusha T wrote a song and it's called "If You Know, You Know," right? And I take that quote and I apply it to signifying, right? That's the one takeaway I get from the whole thing, and which is why I ended my paper with that quote: "If you know, you know." Right? Signifying is that thing that either you're a part of this or you're just an outsider looking in trying to explain what you see, but your definition is always going to come up short because you don't know, right? And when I say no, and when he says no, he's talking about in that sort of almost biblical sense of intimately to know. Like, if you don't know this, you shouldn't be involved in this. And the line that I put from that song is, he says, "One stop like a Walmart, we got the tennis balls for the wrong sport." And those two lines together, there's nothing wrong with them, right? If you look at them, right, he's talking about Walmart, he's talking about tennis balls and sports. He's actually talking about drug dealing. So if you don't know that, you don't know that, right? So there's a play on Walmart when he says one stop. He not to get too far into what he's explaining, but every reference in this particular song is a drug reference. And if you don't know it, you're just singing the lyrics and you don't really know what he's saying. But hey, I like the beat and I'm going to sing along. But he's actually talking about a very specific thing. So again, if you have, as Kernan says, a young person in that community, you would want to pass these things down so that kids would know what type of situation that they're in different parts of their own community. I think that at the end, Gates ends with the fact that I don't think he even nails down an exact definition of signifying. I sort of put my own definition to it, and I just say signifying to me is being a part of a culture and being able to converse and use rhetorical strategies that are known. The meanings are known in that culture. And if you know the meanings, then you know and you're able to converse. If you don't know the meanings, right, you can examine the language and you can look at it and you can talk about it, but you really don't know it. Okay. Again, the rhetorical value I think that Gates assigns to this is that African American vernacular English, African American dialect, to me, does something that even Cesar says that can't be done. Cesar says the language is a system of signs in which the only essential thing is the union of meanings and sounds of language. And he's saying that it exists only by virtue of a sort of contract signed by the member of a community. And he believes that language is the social side of speech. It works through signs, right? And I would take it a step further and say, yeah, it works through signs, but those signs have to have some type of meaning associated with them. And then the audience has to be receptive or involved with those meanings in order to receive them and to understand them correctly. I hope I've explained everything. And if you have any questions, you can let me know. Everybody stay safe. Hope this wasn't too long. I think I got to 22 minutes. Sorry. Hi. Coming to you today to